federal government back under control. The comment that Dr. Ferris made about the courts, if you put it in context, was he said we should have 50 Supreme Court justices, not 9. And one should come from every state, so every state is represented at the Supreme Court of the land, as opposed to 9 people selected at the whim of whatever president happens to be sitting in the power seat at the time that there's a vacancy. So if you throw the European model at it, it sounds grievous, because I'm no fond supporter of the European continent in terms of how they conduct themselves. But Ferris's point was well taken. A Supreme Court with 50 justices, 1 from every state, would be a significantly safer court than 9 justices, balanced 4 and 4 with a swing vote in the middle that we don't know how it's going to go. And in fact, even from time to time, one of our conservative brothers goes off the reservation like Roberts did on the Obamacare thing. So that's just to defend that comment back from Dr. Ferris. Yes, there are possible risks. I like what Benjamin Franklin said. Well, no, not Benjamin Franklin. Where's my quote here?
We've got about 10 seconds.
Okay. Thomas Jefferson said, the people are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. And the Convention of States, Madison said, is our last resort. The last resort belongs to the people. We're organizing the grassroots to get each state submit an application for a Convention of States.
Thank you. Then, Mr. Kinney, you get the next question. To start out with for 2 minutes, would amending the Constitution result in the federal government obeying the Constitution any more than it does now? And if not, what solutions should we be considering?
Okay, we've covered this point a couple of times. I'll just reiterate the fact that the federal government does obey the Constitution now, as interpreted by 9 black-robed judges who have blown holes in the original intent of the Constitution. If you say, is the government obeying the original intent, the answer is absolutely not. If you're saying, is the government obeying the Constitution as currently interpreted by the holes blown in it by the courts, the answer is yes. What we want to do is close those holes. We want to draw the Constitution back to its original intent by going back to the original meaning of the words in the Commerce Clause, the original meaning of the words in the General Welfare Clause, the original meaning of the word in the Supremacy Clause, the original meaning of the words in the Constitution that the lawyers who can create mischief have had so much fun redefining the word is. You know, it really depends on what the word is, as one of our famous lawyers said, and was disbarred for it later, I think. If we're unsuccessful, folks, I think the next step, and I hate to say this, but I think the next step may very well be some states attempting to secede from the Union. When the federal government asked Texas to pay California's debt, when the federal government asked any well-managed state to pick up the debt and the burden of the foolishness of Illinois, of New York, of California, because they're part of the Union and we owe it to our brothers, I think you're going to have some significant rebellion on your hands, which may lead to a dissolution of the Union, or at least an attempt. So I think the Convention of States is our last best effort to put the brakes on that kind of runaway government.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Fry and Mr. Lewis, the question is again, would amending the Constitution result in the federal government obeying the Constitution any more than it does now? And if not, what solutions should we be considering?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't matter. And again, I agree. The people are responsible for making it work. We got to hold our public officials responsible. That's what's failing now. Is not holding our public officials responsible. But Madison said that the Article 5 really was to correct errors. And to try to promote this as a means of controlling the central government, the federal government, is silly. A piece of paper doesn't control itself, doesn't protect itself. We've got to do that, all right? And Madison and Hamilton talked about that in the Federalist Papers. What was the means to do it? The states working together with the help of the people would control the central government. The central government, with the help of the people, would control the states. So basically what they said is, we set the scales evenly, But if something gets out of whack, the people will go to one side or the other, and they will then reestablish the balance. What they want to do is they want to change the scales, structural change. They want to change the scales. And look at what has happened. On the Federalist 28, they even talked about the militia. In fact, the militia was part of its responsibility was to make sure the federal government, its army, didn't infringe upon the states or the citizens' sovereignty. We don't even have a militia. None of the 50 states have a militia. They have a standing army called the National Guard. So instead of the feds supplementing and supporting the state militias, the states now are paying for and supplementing a standing army of the feds. Those things have got to be changed. We got to get back to the Constitution. We don't need to change it. That is not, the Constitution is not the problem. We are the problem because we're not making our elected officials uphold their oath to the Constitution. That's the problem.
All right, thank you.
At any level of government.
At any level.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to go into different, towards the end of the forum now, be a little bit different. We're going to have closing comments. The way it'll work, each side will have 3 minutes, and then followed by a 2-minute rebuttal. So if you want to start, Mr. Kinney, closing. Just want to do 3 each?
Yeah.
3 back, okay. Just expedite it then, we'll have.
Let them go first, because I go first and last go.
Okay, sounds good. 3 minutes to wrap it up then, gentlemen.
Thomas Jefferson said, on every question of construction of the Constitution, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted, recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead, this is real important, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or intended against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. Convention of States says that, well, they are upholding the Constitution as interpreted. The principles of liberty, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights have not been amended outside of there's not some mysterious Constitution outside of this one. It says what it means what it says. To relieve us of our responsibility, Councilor Fry talks about group guilt is no guilt. Group responsibility is no responsibility. We've debated Convention of States on this Article 5 issue from Alaska to Virginia to North Carolina. And we keep hearing it's not our fault. We elect good people. We send them to Washington. Something happens. Something changes them. You can say that about Raleigh too. And we can't cover this in just 2 minutes. But I can give you example after example of we've got the perfect storm of conservative state government here in North Carolina, and against abuses such as the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act, which declared the whole world a battlefield and put the laws of war above the supreme law of the land. The Supreme Court said in Ex parte Milligan in 1861, I believe it was, that the Constitution was for rulers and people alike, in all circumstances, at all conditions, at all times. There is no suspension of my God-given rights, period. I didn't get them from the government. They're not privileges. They're rights. Just keep this simple, because we can go down a lot of complicated rabbit holes, and those of us that are interested in history and the Constitution, it is interesting to have these philosophical discussions and historical references. But common sense says, if people want to obey the 10 Commandments, should we amend them? If your spouse is cheating on you, are you going to say, I guess I need to amend my marriage vows? It's insanity. If public servants won't uphold the Constitution, amending it is not the solution. We need to amend ourselves. The very same people that won't defend our God-given rights now in federal and state and local government are the ones that are going to be, we're not going to be delegates to this convention. It will be controlled by the political elite.
Okay,
They will be making the decisions.
That's 3 minutes. Okay. So, your closing comments, sir. 3 minutes.
A couple of thoughts that I think are pertinent here. There's a vast area of agreement here. One is the original intent of the Constitution is the direction that we want to take our country. That we should be a small, limited government, not a massive federal bureaucracy. Both of us agree to that. Their approach is use the election cycle, educate the people. I don't oppose that approach. I just ask a couple of questions. How long will it take? How are you going to educate the people when the NEA and the AFT control our classrooms? How are you going to educate the people when Common Core is being forced down on top of us with all of its false history and all of its false promise? How are you going to educate, and how long will it take, and how long do we have? I'm concerned about the current course of things, and I don't think my children and grandchildren can survive the $17 trillion debt that's been piled up. I don't think they can survive the inordinate number of regulations that are being piled on the free economy so that there'll be jobs and there'll be prosperity out there for the future. I think we have got to rein in the federal government. Guys, I'm a warrior, not a lawyer. The lawyers can go cross the T's and dot the I's. I say we got to draw a line in the sand, and we got to stand up and be counted. And the Convention of States gives us a voice we don't have today. And it frightens Congress when the Congress thinks that the 50 states would have the temerity to stand up to them and say enough is enough. We're going to change the rules. We're going to go back to the original intent of the Constitution, which will deprive you of your access to my wallet, which will deprive you of this posh life that you live in style, where you get elected and move out of your home state and buy a mansion in D.C., and that now becomes your home state. And you visit us every once in a while during an election cycle just to please the pawns, the paupers, the subjects of your reign. We have got to take control of what's happening. And I think Benjamin Franklin said it best. There might be some issues, there might be some risks involved, but Benjamin Franklin said this, and it can't be said better. Those who would sacrifice their liberty for security deserve neither.
You finish it? Okay. All right. Before we go, there's one more section, one more part to this panel discussion before we take questions from those who attended. Thank you everyone for attending. And that'll be, each side will be able to ask 2 questions to the opposing side. And if we stick with the format, there'll be a 2-minute response and then a 1-minute rebuttal. 2-minute response, then a 1-minute rebuttal. So, I ask Mr. Fry and Mr. Lewis, what's your first question?
My question is, you
Remember, it's not a minute or 2-minute question, it's a question. Just remember.
At Convention of States, Mr. Kinney, your boss is Michael Ferris. And Mr. Ferris, in addition to what he has suggested about changing the Supreme Court, the structure of that, and the Convention of States repeatedly, and even the language of your model application, repeatedly uses the term limit, that you can't. In fact, when I debated Robert Kelly.
It's a question.
It is a question, but it is a
It's
question.
not 2 minutes.
When I debated your staff counsel, Robert Kelly, in Yorktown last month, I asked him, and he said it doesn't expand it, the limit. And yet, Mr. Ferris's parental rights amendment would give the government, federal and state, authority over your children, just simply by demonstrating a governmental interest of the highest order. Why does Mr. Ferris want to grant authority to Caesar that's not Caesar's via the parental rights amendment?
Okay, did you understand the
Well, I
question?
got the question. Hey, Mr. Speaker, here, want to meet you.
I'm so sorry,
You're not
folks.
going to throw up
Got
on me.
stomach
right?
virus.
You're not going to throw up on me.
I don't think so.
Can we restart the clock?
So,
Absolutely.
Okay.
my apologies again.
For this section, we can.
Yeah, just for this section. No, we're not going back to the beginning.
Good,
Okay.
good.
2 minutes.
A couple of comments to the question. One is, I don't know how many know who Dr. Michael Ferris is. He is the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. He is singularly responsible for making homeschool legal in 50 states across this country, so parents have the right to educate their children in their own homes, and the government does not have a right to remove them from the homes without significant high cost. For example, we don't oppose, HSLDA does not oppose reasonable testing criteria to make sure that children are advancing on age and staying up with the grade level. That's reasonable. But short of some catastrophic issue, Michael Ferris has been the strongest defender of parental rights of any single person in this country with his Homeschool Legal Defense Association. When he started that, homeschooling was illegal in a number of states and very, very restricted in others. And today it's legal in all 50 states that parents have that right. So the language in the parental rights amendment that Dr. Ferris had proposed puts the strictest possible standards on federal government or government intervention in the lives of parents and their children. But it doesn't remove it completely, and I don't think any of us would think it would be wise to just completely remove any kind of oversight, because there are irresponsible parents. There are parents who have less than their children's best interests at heart. But the standard ought to be the highest possible legal standard for a government agency to intervene or interfere in what's going on inside the home between the parents and the children.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, let's hold strict and 1 minute to respond. Yeah, 1 minute.
Yeah, the Second Amendment says that the government shall not infringe upon the right to keep and bear arms. It says it shall not. It doesn't give them a high standard. It gives them no standard. And since 1926, we have had nothing but federal gun control. None of it is constitutional. So now we're going to put in the Constitution a right, an authority of the government to start digging into parental rights. Now he says it's a high standard, but remember, the Second Amendment sets no standard, no limit. There's no way to do it. And they're going to say a high standard. It's pretty scary. You're inviting them in, and then you have Judge Roberts, that now is telling us that a penalty is a tax. So here we're going down the same road. The Fed need to keep their hands out of it. They don't need to be involved in our families.
Once you codify this parental rights amendment into the Constitution, then Congress and the courts can pursue it. Right now, they don't have a leg to stand on in between parents and their children. You put this in the Constitution, and they will. They already have protections against children being abused. We have statutes on books already that deal with that.
Okay.
Tell that to the parents in Massachusetts whose daughters were taken away from them because they had conflicting opinions from doctors, and they chose the one the state did.
Yeah, just happening.
Okay, then, Mr. Kinney, you and your colleague, now ask them a question.
I'm going to ask a question, and he's going to ask the second question. This is, I'm just trying to understand the approach that my distinguished colleagues are taking to resolving the crisis that we're in today. And so here's my question. How is it that your approach discounts the wisdom of the people to be trusted with an Article 5 authority to address the questions of the runaway government, but they can be trusted to defend against the assault on our liberty taking place on multiple fronts across 4 time zones in all 50 states?
Well, that's
That's easy to rebut. Number one is, let me tell you something. It's not going to be the people that are going to be the delegates. They're not trusting us. They're telling us to trust them. And just like in the state of Kansas, we're not going to be the delegates. They're going to make a governor who's supposed to be a conservative governor who promotes Obamacare and sustainable development and Common Core. He's going to be one of the delegates, right? And our Senate president will be a delegate or controlled delegate. She's an executive officer of ALEC that's been promoting this and spending millions of dollars promoting it for decades. Our House Speaker, an executive director of ALEC. We're not controlling this. They're going to be controlling it. They're telling us, trust us, this political system's going to make everything all better for you. The way to do it is, if you want to make changes, put the right of recall in your state constitutions, and you'll put the fear of God in those politicians, because you can pull them out of office just like they did in Colorado when they lied to you, or they abused the Constitution.
Okay, you got a minute left.
In addition, the states already have, I've heard Mr. Kinney say this more than one time, that we just want to wait and address this at the next election cycle. Article 6, Clause 2 is a supremacy clause. No law or treaty that's not written in pursuance of the Constitution ever becomes a law. There is no such thing as state nullification of a constitutional federal act. A federal act that's not constitutional is null and void in the first place. The states already have all the authority to do what needs to be done. And the rightful remedy is to interpose against the evils. The founders mentioned in the Federalist Papers and in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions and the Madison's report on 1800, interposition 25 times, and nullification once, and it was past tense, and it was in reference to the states putting their foot down against unconstitutional intrusions by the federal government. Interposition is the rightful remedy. The states have a duty, not just a right or a privilege, but a duty to get in between we the people and a rogue federal government.
Thanks. You got a minute to respond.
First of all, we support nullification efforts. We think they are, like if you had chicken pox and you're scratching one pox because it itches, it doesn't solve the disease, but it feels good to scratch the itch. And so we support the idea of nullification, although Thomas Jefferson and James Madison did not believe that the 10th Amendment gave individual states the rights to nullify federal law, that they both agreed in judicial review, which is why we've got to write the law so that the judges understand what they're reviewing. The second part of the question, actually I guess the first part of the question was, you won't have any voice, that the politicians will select who are the delegates. We are building out a grassroots organization. We hope to have 3 or 4 million volunteers who are an email away from making a phone call to their state legislator. And when this process begins to unfold, we see it in 3 phases. One is to get 34 states to send their applications. Number 2 is to mold the formation of the delegates that go to the convention from the states by the voices that are heard from the people. And then 3rd is in the ratification process when we need 38 states to ratify what comes out. We will fight against any of those stupid things that come out, and we will stand for those amendments, common sense amendments that restrain the order of the federal government.
Thanks. So then, last question from Mr. Fry and Mr. Lewis.
Convention of States, Citizens for Self-Governance, are spending, and the people behind it are spending millions of dollars and amassing this large grassroots organization of 3 million people. Councilor Fry talked about the balances between the state and federal government's role and central government, that when one got out of whack, the people should rally to the other one to bring it back into balance. Why will they not, rather than risk playing Russian roulette with our Constitution and Bill of Rights, why will the Convention of States and Citizens for Self-Governance not channel those energies and monies toward getting those people to stand in front of or behind those state legislatures to interpose?
I'll take a shot at that. I appreciate your question, and I appreciate the chance to be here. This is an enormous problem, and it's been building really for 100 years, and certainly the last 50 years with the progressive movement. And kind of related to what Jim said about nullification, we can nip around the edges, or we can really transform or begin to turn our country in the right direction again. And if you read Article 5, if you understand it, the state legislatures have every bit as much right to call a convention and propose amendments as does Congress. Now, who's done it? Historically, it's been Congress, okay? And most of the amendments, I think we would agree, serve a good purpose. There may be a couple that we certainly could take exception with, and I would get on board with that. But by and large, Congress has been the only one who has proposed the amendments. Why in the world are we fearful that state legislatures are going to do the wrong thing when we've been trusting Congress, who I think most of us would agree has been running amok for a long time, to do the right thing? I mean, if you're going to stand against a Convention of States movement, then you ought to be all over trying to eliminate Article 5 and take away the power that's given to Congress. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody would expect that to happen. The state legislatures are in the right position and the right people because they're close to us. We're close to them, and they respond to their constituents. And to the issue of the size of this organization, I don't know if we're spending millions of dollars yet. It'd be nice if we had millions of dollars to be spending. We probably will be, or we might be at some point. But the organization is going about it in a very pragmatic and frugal way, which is what I would expect of Mike Ferris and Mark Meckler. They're terrific leaders. And like Jim, I've known Michael for years because we homeschooled our kids for years, and we're most impressed with Michael and what he did for the homeschool movement and now what he's doing for Convention of States.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lyons. And you have 1 minute to respond.
If you look at Article 5, it clearly says, Congress shall call the convention on the application of the legislatures. Call is a term of art, parliamentary term of art. It has real meaning. It does not give the states any authority over that convention. All they do is make an application, and to say that they control it, they want to say that they control it. That's not true, and they don't. Both of the processes involve the components of the government, so the state and federal in both of them. One of them is controlled by the state and one of them controlled by Congress. They're both a federalist procedure. So the states don't call it, and they're not the ones that they get to decide how it works. It's not the way it works.
Okay, thank you. Then the last question from Mr. Lyons and Mr. Kinney to the other side.
Well, I guess pretty simple and tied to what I talked about just a minute ago. If you look at Article 5 and you understand what Congress has done time and again, although admittedly the last amendment I think was in the 70s, so it's been a good 40 years since an amendment was written. Why the fear over empowering the states to do this when you consider procedurally how difficult it is to do? It takes 34 states, and they may have gone over this, and I apologize if I'm being redundant, but it takes 34 states to call a convention. It takes 25 of the delegates that are sent to that convention to vote in the affirmative on any one of the amendments in order for those amendments to then be sent back to the states. And then if an amendment or a series of amendments are sent back to the states, it takes 38 states to vote for those amendments. If you look at the makeup of the state legislatures today, I don't think there's any possible scenario that you can come up with where you would have a rogue convention or a series of rogue amendments that might actually get through. Now, we can stick our head in the sand and we can choose to do nothing and watch our country go down, or we can be bold, as our framers and founders were, and we can make a difference. And that's really what this comes down to.
Okay, so your essential question was to clarify before you answer. What's the fear?
Yeah, what's the fear?
What's the fear? You have 2 minutes.
We're in North Carolina. I just told you, we have the perfect storm. A super majority veto-proof in both chambers of the legislature, a Republican governor, a Republican lieutenant governor, a majority Republican control of the North Carolina Supreme Court. We could not get these folks to even put a complaint in the King's complaint box about the 2012 NDAA's creation or application of the law of war on U.S. soil by the U.S. government. They wouldn't even complain about it. It violates over no fewer than 14 provisions of the Constitution, including over half the Bill of Rights. Where is their backbone going to come from here in Raleigh to stand up for my rights at a convention when they won't stand up for them now?
How much time?
I don't trust them.
Over a minute.
Yeah,
There's no evidence that they can be trusted.
the Kansas legislature is controlled by Republicans, and there's supposed to be a conservative Republican governor in that state. He is the #1 promoter of sustainable development in that state. He's the #1 promoter of regional governance in that state. He will not stand against Common Core. He's implemented Obamacare in spite of the fact he campaigned against it, and the legislature goes along with it. No, we shouldn't trust him. Why don't we have a militia of the states? Because the states sold out for federal money. Half of the budget in Kansas is federal dollars. It's education dollars. There is no constitutional authority for the federal government to spend money on education, and therefore there is no constitutional authority for the states to accept educational money. They are complicit with the federal government in robbing our liberties and breaking the Constitution. We can't trust them. We got to get them in control before we can get the federal government in control. That's what the founders said. The states were going to need to work with the people to get the feds under control. First get the states under control and then make them do their job.
All right, thank you.
We got time left?
Yeah, they have a minute.
There's an old joke. An old joke about politicians who are asked difficult questions. The standard response is, well, I have friends on one side and I have friends on the other side and I stand with my friends. Okay? They don't want to take a stand. They're right. We have a lot of gutless politicians who figure out what's going on by doing this. and we're gonna blow the wind. If we have 3 million volunteers who at the drop of a hat pick up the phone and call, you know who legislators respond to? 15 or 20 or 30 calls from their constituents, 50 emails on a subject from their constituents. Guess who they listen to? We're not going to leave it to them to just try to figure out what's right or wrong. We're not going to just send them a petition and hope they can figure out the right answer. We are going to be backing up everything we do with this grassroots voice, a cacophony of noise from their states. We want you to be a part of that, by the way. My wife's sitting right there, the redhead, and she's got a sign-up form out here. We'd love to have you sign up to be a volunteer. Get on our email list, and we'll start sending you those calls to action, because this is coming to a head in North Carolina on the 18th of May, when the session begins. We have sponsors in both the House and the Senate who will submit an application for a convention of states, and we're going to try to push it through the House and the Senate in this short legislative cycle, because we have a very conservative majority and we have veto-proof position.
Thank you. All right, we could either finish, we could go into question and answer now for 15 minutes from those who attended, or we could break for a literal 5 minutes, not a liberal 5 minutes. What is the will of the people?
Keep going.
Let's go to questions and go to lunch.
The will of the people will prevail. You want to say something, Don?
No, I'm just gonna
Okay,
put this in somebody's mouth when they get ready to ask.
we're going to try.
So we can hear.
This is what we're trying to do. This be the rules. The question will be asked, and then both sides will have 1 minute to respond. That's the way we follow.
Is there a time limit on the question?
No, hopefully no rules. Hopefully there won't be a speech. No speeches, please.
I'm close enough, there is a time limit on it.
Okay.
Only the moderators can make speeches.
I'd like to address this to Mr. Fry. First of all, appreciate coming all the way from Kansas. I've enjoyed it. Can you hear me better?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. I appreciate you coming all the way from Kansas and enjoyed most of what you said, but as typical, I've got a disagreement. I've watched the corruption of our government. I'm a small business person, and it's just out of control. And I used to believe the same thing you did, exactly. But only the people can change the politicians through being active and knowledgeable.